What's the most shocking thing you've ever caught somebody doing? Probably NSFW. One time I went to play my friend's Xbox. All of the boxes for the games were empty, and the discs were all stacked one on top of each other. Catching a guy masturbating to a children's potty training book at the toy store. My mom searched Google for google.com. This guy in my multimedia class openly masturbating to anthropomorphic animal porn on the computer. The whole class watched in horror and moved to the other side of the room. The teacher eventually realized it and made it awkward for the kid by standing behind him and going, "So, what you doing?" He got banned from using school computers after that. I work in a supermarket in the UK and we had a mentally challenged guy working for us. One day in October last year a customer came up yelling about the retard with a trolley. After a quick hunt we found him midway down the main aisle with his cock out, furiously masturbating and licking his lips. He only stopped when our security guy threw a towel over him and dragged into the offices. Not me but my best mate's sister. She used to work in a nursing home. One day was tending to a lady who had her hand in her dressing gown and would not answer to any question or instruction. Friend's sister noticed a horrible smell. Old lady's gown dropped and she had defecated herself and was using the feces as a kind of lube and was rubbing herself out. My friend watched his sister naked through a hidden window. Source: I joined him. I once saw a girl poop. A girl. Saw a guy blow his brains out. Was at a gas station getting my daily fix of Diet Coke and as I was leaving the store I saw that a bunch of cops moving towards this van in the parking lot. The guy went behind the van, put a gun to his head and pulled the trigger. Turns out the guy had gone on a killing spree, killing his wife and kids and then shot up an insider trader's office. Had nightmares about that for months. For those who care. A few years ago, I had to work at a sketchy gas station in a sketchy part of town. We were locked behind bulletproof glass. There was a safe room behind the counter and we occasionally had cops respond to a call and then just stay there for the rest of the overnight shift. Because the cop felt we needed him. Basically, I was extremely poor and this was the only place that had called me back when I was applying for jobs. I got lucky and mostly worked the day shifts. One day, in the middle of the day, we're slow and I'm staring out the window counting down the hours till my shift ends and I see a fat, crazy looking black lady wearing a tiny little skirt and a ripped tank top. She grabs a shred of newspaper off the ground, squats, pisses, rubs the newspaper down there and throws it down. We had an outside cooler of popsicles that people would grab and then pay for inside. Rarely did they get paid for. I don't know why we had them outside. We must have lost a lot of money. Anyways, she goes up that cooler, grabs a popsicle, unwraps it and alternative shoves it in her mouth and her bag. Catcalling every gent who walked within a 20-foot radius. I called the cops on her, but for a good 5 minutes I stood there watching her, wondering what the duck my life was coming to and whether or not living in this city was worth it. A guy had spent the night at my place and I needed to leave early the next morning, but said he could stay around as long as he wanted. We were messing around a little and he said he would finish himself off after I left. After I'd gone, I realized I'd forgotten something and went back to get it. When I got there, I noticed he'd locked the door to my bedroom inside my apartment. As I was unlocking it he called out, "Wait. Hold on." He'd been dating for a while and I knew he was getting off so I was confused. I opened the door anyway and see this super tall, hyper masculine, not particularly sexually open guy on all fours on my floor surrounded by missex toys, including a hot pink suction cup dildo and some Benoit balls Ray appropriated as anal beads. I just kind of paused in shock for a minute. This was not something that we discussed before. None of these were for anal use. These were all really expensive, really nice toys, and I had someone waiting for me in my car so I had to just sort of take in the scene and run. Edit TL. Doctor walked in on my then boyfriend using my hot pink dildo without asking. Handicapped kids playing Red Rocket with a stray. Once I slept in my friend's living room but needed to take a piss. In my drunken haze, I mistook the guest room as the bathroom. I opened the guest room and there was my friend, wearing nothing but boxers and a motorcycle helmet, kneeling down with his one arm extended out, reciting Lion King Circle of Life speech to someone on webcam. shut the door and acted like nothing happened. Attempting to spike a girl's drink at a nightclub. The bouncers reviewed the CCTV and called the cops, who took him away. Guy shooting heroin on the bus with his kid beside him, who was only about 6 years old and full of questions about the whole process. Father was more than happy to explain where the liquid was going. Catching my ultra-religious preacher grandfather watching porn was pretty traumatic. The worst part was that I recognized the site, Pornhub. I might have jerked off to the same thing my grandfather did. The horror. I would drop off pick up a female friend from someone else's house near mine. I thought she was buying weed or something like that. I don't smoke, so I just assumed she was hiding it from me to be respectful. One time I told her, you don't have to be so secretive. I don't care what you're doing in there. Well, turns out the guy that lived there actually had a foot fetish and paid her to come over. He smelled her feet while laying on the floor and jacking off. Sometimes he also asked her to kick him in the face, leave her sneakers there, etc. TLDR. My friend was a foot prostitute. Edit. No, I don't know how much money she got. And no, we are no longer friends. She refused to pay me back for money I loaned to her for her to go to a concert. Then she stopped talking to me. My male cousin trying to duck a banana. An extremely obese woman had fallen and required 6 firemen to come and help her get back up. I once saw someone play the Wii without the safety strap. It was the day after my parents told me that my dad was moving away and that I had to go with him. I was 10 at the time, so it came a huge shock. I was going to be taken from my home of 10 years and dumped into some city far away. I didn't really know how to deal with that stress at the time, so I ran away. I found this really neat secluded alleyway between 2 old walls with vines growing all over them. There was a pretty sturdy ledge on one of the walls and my first instinct was to climb to it to get a better view. That's when I started hearing voices from a window nearby. I couldn't really make it out, but they weren't familiar ones. I climbed to investigate. I inched closer and closer to the source of the noise. And, lo and behold, their queen sorcery was naked with her own twin brother. In high school we had a special education class, the only one in the entire district. So we had a high concentration of those with mental deficiency to varying degrees. While they had special classes, they shared classes like gym, art and drama with everyone else. There were 2 kids who always hung out together. Not exactly sure what was wrong with them, but they acted flamboyant with the mentality of a 5-year-old. It was to the point that one wouldn't go to the washroom without the other. And for the most part teachers would allow this, knowing they would have tantrums. Midway through science class I get up to take a leak. I go into the washroom and see both of them Spider-Man'd up on top of the toilet stall taking dumps from orbit. I'm in shock, thinking what the duck. One of them makes eye contact and panics. He loses his footing, falling into the crescendo. Then it happens. The other guy starts dropping it orbital strikes onto his fallen comrade, laughing like a maniac. At that point I bolted and walked back into science class, white as a ghost. My teacher asked what was wrong and I stammered out I think you need to go. You need to go to the bathroom. He rushes down the hall and I hear Jesus ducking. Christ, really? Well, not the most gruesome thing I've witnessed, but the most shocking for sure. Last week I was riding the bus. Saw a homeless woman with her arm inside her sweater mumbling to herself. When she got off the bus she stretched her arm that was in the sweater and I could see a tit hanging down to her belly button. She proceeded to rub her nipples while getting off the bus. I saw some kid setting a wounded bird on fire, alive. Needless to say I got really pissed. Someone wearing black shoes with brown pants. Masturbating on the BART train. We were the only 2 people in the train, and he looked at me and went back to his wanking. I walked to the next car fast as possible. As they're in the UK, me and a friend were on the daily after work routine of buying energy drinks and chocolate eclairs, when we overhear a child screaming from an aisle down. Me being the inquisitive bugger I am, go to investigate. I come round the corner to see a child laying on his back, shirt over his head, repeatedly screaming Hitler, 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 with his mother trying to make him be quiet. I was crying with laughter, out of sight of course. Seeing a guy get knocked out when I was 16, I didn't realize how weird the body reacts. I thought he died. I was on a cub camp in the UK. Cubs are the younger version of scouts, so I was about 8/9. I'm 18 now. I shared a tent with 3 other boys who I knew quite well, and me and one other from our tent were playing football outside until it started to rain, so we decided to go back to the tent. It was at this point we opened the tent to the 2 other boys in our tent licking each other's cocks. Yeah, that was pretty shocking. Nothing was said of this incident between the 4 of us ever again. I quit Cubs after that camp. I went to a really religious Muslim friend's house. He opened his laptop and suddenly torrent popped up. It was full of straight anal sex videos. I mean, a lot. Anal isn't allowed in Islam. I was quite surprised. This probably isn't the most shocking thing I've encountered, but it's the only thing I can recall right now. I kinda felt sorry for my friend. He'll never be able to fulfill his fantasy. I walked into my room. The PC was in my room, and my mom and her BF were looking at something on the PC. They told me I shouldn't be looking at it as it was their business. Then I heard some familiar music. They were watching Two Girls One Cup. Took my then 4-year-old daughter into the men's room at Barnes & Noble. As I walked in, I saw balloons floating above the handicapped stall. Looking down, you could see camera tripod feet resting on the floor. Naturally, I scooped my daughter up and beelined to the desk to give them the WTF. Their reply? Oh no, not again. As this was going on, the kid, roughly 18, hustled through the store to the street. I used to work at a special needs summer camp, severe to profound mental disabilities, so I've seen a lot of strange things. But one thing that sticks out is not something the campers did, but the counselors. It was evening and almost everyone is off. I'm in the dining hall to grab something to eat, but first I need to pee. So I walk into the restroom and there are 4 guys and 1 girl in there. I freeze, because 3 of the guys are standing in the corners of the room, wanking. The last guy is in the middle of the room with the girl, and he says with a big smile on his face, "I won." The girl is just all kinds of emotions. Excited, embarrassed, confused, maybe a little bit horny. And these 2 are cheering the others on. The girl then explains they're having a wanking race and the guy in the middle of the room just won. And they're fighting for the second spot now. About then 1 guy comes on the wall. Happiness is had. I'm just so confused now. I don't recall what I did. Probably said congrats and got out. Because WTF. That's summer camp, y'all. Edit. This is counselors I'm talking about, not the campers. Returning staff at that. Camp life is hard to explain, because every day was not appropriate by typical social standards. In high school, some guy started knocking one out in French lesson. The whole class could see. It wasn't pretty. The same guy then did the same thing in maths a week or so later. He finished up and wiped it on the kid sitting next to him's face. I caught a guy drinking little kids' piss out of the urinal in the movie theater where I used to work. This is the best article I could find, but it's about to later arrest when he was caught doing the same thing. A couple shooting heroin in the laundry room of the app building. I walked past them like they weren't even there. Put my clothes in dryer and walked out. I made my HB go out there with me the next time, but they were gone then. Flying a plane into the World Trade Center. I was in my 4th grade math class, and we watched from our classroom window the second plane hit. My partner and I were walking from the train station at Coney Island, NY, to the boardwalk and saw a lady in the distance squatting against a fence. She left, and when we approached the spot she squatted at, we saw massive splatter of it all over the ground. When I was in grade 4, 9 years old, I went to the toilet during class and kept hearing massive bombs being dropped in the handicapped toilet stall next to mine. When I got out, the person in that stall got out also, and it turned out to be the hugely overweight tuck shop. In Australia, our canteen thing is called a tuck shop lady, who I called the cane toad because she looked like one and was super mean, who just stared at me and said, as if she was considering killing me, to hide the truth, that the woman's toilet's not working. Then she left without washing her hands. Obviously she didn't expect to run into anyone. Scared the absolute out of me. As a 9-year-old, TLDR, caught hugely overweight woman using male handicapped toilet because the female one was broken and obviously normal toilets are too small for her. Edit. And just to put in context, as a 9-year-old, it was the super most shocking thing ever. I once walked in on this guy sticking his D in a jar full of peanut butter. I was like, dude, you're ducking nuts. Electrician changing a wire on an adjustable light and his hand jiggling like a slice of ham. I also watched some commit suicide. It was at my high school, Australia. For clarification, he intended to harm all of us, but after a confrontation with a teacher, he shot himself through the head in front of a small group. 11 years later, it is still clear as day in my mind. You never forget that it. First year in college, walked in on my roommate naked in bed, stroking his cock, while reading Ender's Game. I slowly backed out and closed the door and we never talked about it ever. I'm not even sure if he noticed me, but ever since I have wondered, what possible scene from that entire book could he have found fab-worthy? I walked in on my sister getting Eiffel Towered by some dudes. That action isn't necessarily shocking, but the experience was darker being my sister and all. I worked in a meat processing business over the summer. Long story short, I walked into the freezer and found an employee having his way with a severed cow's head. Scraggly dude trying to dispose of a body in an industrial tub in the back of the mixing room, using acid, without gloves or goggles. Appalling. I lived in Vegas for years and saw some crazy stuff. I used to ride public transit to my dealing job on the strip. It was just easier. One day, while riding the bus to work, I saw this dirty looking tweaker shove his hand down a boy's, maybe 5, pants, in front of the kid's mother. She started screaming, and the guy was restrained by fellow passengers on the bus. A few stops later, 4 cops boarded the bus, dragged the guy out and planted him face down on the hot pavement, very roughly. Incidentally, Vegas cops are not to be trifled with. They'll shoot you for sneezing and they'll get away with it. It was a pretty shocking incident, even for Vegas. I've also seen people openly masturbate on these buses. Shoot up, puke, it, you name it. I even saw a knife fight take place not 10 feet in front of me. Forget the Vegas floor shows. Ride the buses. Impaled pregnant lady on a tree. I was driving home from work and came around a sharp curve to discover an accident that had just occurred. Only one cop car had arrived. A man was driving his pregnant sister to the hospital and didn't make the curve. Their car hit the ditch, flipped, and they were both thrown out. She unfortunately ended up impaled on a tree branch in clear view of any passers-by. Had nightmares for a while and can still see her white sock-covered feet dangling. TLDR. Bad reg. Car through passengers. Pregnant lady impaled on tree branch. Can't unsee. A man taking a writ. In first grade I walked in on an elderly man doing his business. And the look in his, I'll never forget. Probably homeless mentally unstable people in large crowds. One woman talking to herself outside a train station got ever louder and more erratic and then dramatically wet herself through her shorts and stormed off. Another time I was walking through a very crowded Piccadilly Circus in central London and saw an odd trail of liquid flowing through the middle of a crowd. I traced it back to the source and sure enough, old grubby homeless guy crouching down with his D dangling out near a phone box. I also once saw a man in a 3-piece tweed suit incoherently drunk near a park at about 10 in the morning. He was beyond gone and was attracting a crowd, not for screaming or shouting, but because he was moving in such a terrifying manner, a half shuffle with his head lolling. It was like a marionette with only 2 strings working. He would have been very nicely attired if he had washed or shaved in the past 3 days. It seemed to me that when you go to AA and tell your embarrassing story of hitting rock bottom and being really drunk, his is the story they tell you to make you feel better. Years ago my co-worker and I walked in on our boss molesting his stepson. We beat him unconscious then took his kids to the police. Turned out he was on the run for child molestation and was living under an assumed name. Me and the cross-country team were going on a run at a public park with an elementary school 200 yards or so away. There was a mowed field behind the school and we were bored so we decided to run back there. We came across 2 people full out banging in the middle of the field within full view of the school. This was 15 minutes or so after school had dismissed and there were still some students around the school. The woman's child was standing right there asking to go home while the mom was begging her son to not tell dad. TL. Doctor was on a run and a cheating wife was ducking a man by a school while her child watched. Nothing too crazy. My good buddy lived in a 2-story 3-room condo with his grandma. She lived on the bottom floor and my friend lived on the top. One day I go over to visit and his grandma lets me in and tells me they're upstairs. Not even thinking about it, I go upstairs and walk right in the room. On the bed is my friend's GF on her back with her head propped up by 2 pillows and my friend only wearing a shirt and socks hovering over her with his D in her mouth just going to town. I took one good look, screamed like a little girl and ran back downstairs. The grandma looks at me and says, "Oh sorry, I forgot to tell you he was with his lady friend." I walked in on my friend in high school trying to duck her dog. I left immediately but she told me at school the next day that she'd succeeded. Cannot unsee. Driving to visit family around Memorial Day weekend. A huge string of bikers were taking up the left-hand lane on the highway. There was probably about 50-60 of them. I'm driving my little Mazda 3 when I see the biker next to me get bumped by his buddy from his left. Suddenly, the scene slowed down into a grotesque domino effect of people being thrown into ditches and onto the road. As I started to pull onto the shoulder, I watched a large biker get thrown off of his bike. He slid face down onto the pavement for quite some time. There was a large growing puddle of blood surrounding his head. I watched as his exposed skin turned ashen grey. We got out of the car, offered blankets, water and first aid supplies to the nearest bikers. Looking around the highway, it seemed as though it was almost apocalyptic with the crumbled bikes and screaming bloodied bikers strewn about. To this day, I'm terrified of driving anywhere near a biker. TLDR. Witnessed a huge biker accident on a major highway. A lot of death and destruction. Not insanely shocking, but I was in PHL flying home after Hurricane Irene, 2011, left me stranded for a couple days. I was standing in line at security when this little boy began excitedly exclaiming, "I'm a terrorist," while he giggled. His mother began to panic and hurriedly hushed him saying, "No no no baby, we tourists. Tourists. That no funny in this country." I was a lifeguard at a pool in a very popular national park. My co-workers and I wanted to take a multi-day camping trip, but couldn't all get off on the same day because the pool was never closed. After some research, we discovered the policy that if someone pooped in the pool it had to be drained and cleaned before reopening. We all argued about who would do the deed. It was in a high traffic area with no place to hide, and no one would step up. I returned the next morning to open the pool and found the hottest girl on staff squatting and spraying into the deep end. I appreciated the days off, but it really killed my mental image of her. At my old job we had a guy with Down syndrome who was transferred in from another store. He started hitting on a 16-year-old cashier so aggressively that he had to be reprimanded and their schedules revised so that they wouldn't work together, because she was threatening a restraining order against him. It came out later that similar problems had led to him being transferred out of our old store. He joked for weeks afterward about how our company was so concerned for diversity that we proud to be the place where the mentally handicapped sexually harass the underage.